It's not the house that's haunted. It's your son.
What's your favorite scary movie?
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
What is up, my spooky people? We are back with Slashers in Sync, and we're going to be taking a shot at reviewing and going over Nosferatu, which Marvelous and I were able to see very recently. We are a little late to the party, but I mean, man, this film fucking holds up. And let me introduce my co-host, the wonderful, the beautiful. How are you doing, Marvelous?
I'm okay. I'm better than last week. My voice may go in and out, but we're here.
We are here. So, Nosferatu. I think when we saw this cast, like, being announced throughout the build-up to this film, it was pretty, like, a big deal. Like, we're talking about Willem Dafoe. I believe at one point they even had Anna Taylor on board from The Witch and from other films. They ended up recasting her for, what is the actress?
Lily Rose Depp.
Lily Rose Depp. So
Johnny Depp's daughter.
So she blew it out of the park. Like, I'm not sitting here and saying that, like, Anna couldn't have done a better job. There's an obvious reason why she was probably picked first. Also, she'd worked with Robert Eggers on The Witch. Yes. So it makes a lot of sense for that to be the go-to. And she probably would have killed this role too, but man, Lily Rose
did a very good job.
Yeah, like, there was moments that I actually felt genuinely uncomfortable because I know for a fact that's what she was going for. Like, that's because she was uncomfortable throughout most of this fucking movie. Mm-hmm. So, man, like, she killed it. And just the entire cast too. I mean, they even had Aaron Taylor Johnson there, which we'll be seeing him in the future when it comes to the 28 Days Later franchise. Yep. So that should be fun. And he's done a few horror movies in the past, but he's recently kind of over to action with, like, Bullet Train and Craven, but we're not going to talk about Craven.
I haven't watched the film and I haven't heard the best things about it either, so I think I'm okay.
Yeah, so that's that. But just a fun fact for some people out there who don't know this, because I'm sure people wondered when they saw the trailer for this or just had the curious idea, what does Nosferatu mean? And Nosferatu basically just means vampire. It is presented as an archaic Romanian word synonymous with vampire or Lord of the Night. So, very fitting name, but obviously Nosferatu is something that you hear a lot in that movie, and it's you don't really hear the word vampire thrown around much. You do. No. I think Von Franz or Dr. Ebenhardt, whatever you want to call him, Willem Dafoe's character, I believe he uses the word vampire or like vampiriny or something like that.
I don't remember that, but if he did, I wouldn't be surprised.
So again, very not vampire, but
very synonymous to what we call a vampire today.
But that's basically what Nosferatu means. And also for some people who are listening to this, and I actually want to get your thoughts because I don't know how much you know about the old film from 1922.
I hardly know any.
Did you know that this film was an illegal adaptation of Dracula?
An illegal?
Yes.
Actually, I heard that rumor before, funny enough.
So the film was an illegal adaptation of Dracula, which was not public domain at the time in Germany. However, the film was still made, despite the Bram Stoker estate's objections. This then led to the estate filing a suit against the film and the almost permanent ban and destruction of an all-time horror classic. So at one point, this movie was not going to be made because if you're not fully aware of this, and not just you, but other people as well, Nosferatu was actually an unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. Various names and other details were changed, and the most important being, instead of Count Dracula, it is Count Orlok.
Yeah.
And if you watch the original Dracula film, it kind of starts off very similar to Nosferatu, right? Even though Bram Stoker's Dracula came out in the 1930s and this was in 1922, it's very much like a guy goes into a castle holding a suitcase, they're signing some stuff. Like, it's very similar. And very interesting that after 100 years later, we get the remake, and it's from Robert Eggers, and I don't think anyone better than this. This dude is. I think we talked about him, but I don't think we gave him the flowers that we should have when we did our Jordan Peele discussion.
No, I was mainly going based off of like social media feedback though, because not many people were talking about Robert Eggers as much as they were Peele and Astor.
Right.
But he was definitely within the realm of them. I would say like close second to the duo.
Because I think the 2015 The Witch is probably one of the most...
Now, definitely right now.
Like that movie when you and I think you actually started watching it without me, and I did. And I just came in and sat next to you, and that movie...
You were asking me a lot of questions. I remember that.
Yeah, that movie fucked us both up to the point to where when we were laying down in bed together, we both were on our phones just trying to find out more about it, just to kind of see if we had the same idea as other people at how it ended, the wiki, explained the ending, like...
I think I was completely off track. You were somewhere close to the track. But all in all, like, it's definitely left for the interpretation, which why you and I brought him up during the Peele versus Astor debate, because of the fact that Eggers is very horror renaissance-esque in the sense that it's like
very gothic horror.
Very gothic as well, like you said. His name is definitely on the map. So anybody who's ever like now going to be watching horror, at least in the 2020s, that Robert Eggers' name is for sure going to pop up.
This guy should not be that handsome and this talented at the same time.
Yeah, you showed me a photo of him. He's a decent looking guy.
So Mark from KRW Network, he hates the term elevated horror, but even he admitted that if there's anybody who is making horror movies that make you think,
it's Eggers.
It's Eggers right now.
Yeah.
Like I mean, I think I saw a thread where everyone said, just give him everything. Give him the Wolfman, because I heard the one that came out right now sucked. Give him
that makes me sad.
Yeah, give him Frankenstein. Give him everything. Like
all the classic Universal horrors.
Because there's no one who can capture that period, I think, as good as him.
Yeah. I could probably I can envision him actually sitting there watching the classic movies over and over and over again and like writing his own interpretation of every single scene as he's doing the rewatch.
Yeah.
Like, this man seems almost obsessive over the topic. I know Nosferatu doesn't have a book, to my knowledge.
No, it's just the adaptation of the Dracula book.
But I promise you, like, the way that the movie was portrayed, it almost seemed like as if he was picking pieces off of each Nosferatu film that had been released up until this point, up until his retelling. I haven't seen the other films. I think there's entirety of like... I thought there was two.
There's only one Nosferatu film, 1922.
Oh.
Yeah, you're not wrong when you say like he's picking the scenes though, because I know you haven't seen the original Nosferatu.
I have not.
I have. Mm-hmm. It is a complete, almost shot-for-shot remake of that movie. It's just obviously with dialogue now, since that movie didn't have any dialogue back then, and then also just modern takes of like cinematography and stuff. But it's basically a shot-for-shot like remake of that movie, which is not bad because I feel like remakes nowadays, and this is a whole other discussion for the podcast.
Yeah.
It's been 100 years. That's when a remake should hit.
Yeah.
Not like remaking like the Harry Potter franchise just 10 years after
it's been finished.
This is 100 years later. We're talking about 100 years, Marva, of technology, different depictions of filmmaking. Like, it makes sense.
It does. And then not only that, but you're also adapting the story to the generation that's like sitting before you now. So obviously you keep the same points, but on the flip side, you also explain things a little differently because somebody in the 1920s wouldn't necessarily understand things that are being portrayed in the 2020s or vice versa.
Exactly. 100%. So we'll go ahead and get into the breakdown, and please make sure to comment down below whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're at, and just let us know your thoughts on Nosferatu as well.
Please.
And also just let us know of other films that you would want us to check out as well, just because we're always on the hunt for new stuff. Marv and I have a pretty big collection of movies to review and break down, but there's always more. I mean, her and I haven't even begun to even take a look at what like Shudder offers as an example.
We're hardly through our own freaking library.
Let's like our own honest. Little. Yeah. So.
Also, by the way, if you've been new and you've been enjoying this episode so far, please go ahead and hit that cute little bell either on YouTube or on Spotify. You'll get a little notification that lets you know when our next episode is out.
Exactly. And make sure to follow us everywhere. You can find us under Slashers in Sync or Slash in Sync. Links will be in our bio and also in the description. So thank you very much. But without further ado, here's 2024's Nosferatu.
Yep.
The movie starts off with a young girl praying late at night, but the words are a bit different. And even in this scene, it's almost as if she is almost in a state of just like disarray or just,
sorrow.
like
Complete
sorrow, right? It's just, you can tell something's not right there.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if like she's calling out to someone or to something to come out and look after her. There's a dark figure that shows up at her patio and reaches out to her, saying that she is not meant for humans, but for something far greater. Ellen looks to be frozen in fear, or this is what the woman would be known as Ellen later on. The scene suddenly shows her falling off the patio to the story below. When she falls, she lands flat on her back. Now, fun little tidbit around this. I didn't get to catch a lot of this, so this is Marvin making the comments on the notes because some people sat in our seats at the theaters.
MJ is still a little sour about it, by the way. I'm sure you've noticed.
Sat in our seats. And because of that, that led to the awkward situation of people who did have seats that we chose also had to sit next to us, and they were not in their own seats either.
Yeah.
And started talking shit about how we took their seats when our seats got. It was a
domino effect.
Yeah.
Needless to say, MJ was sitting closer to them than I was, so I honestly didn't even notice their conversation until after the fact. So, yeah.
So I didn't get to see a lot of this, but I did see the part I'm about to get to, and this is why I wanted to bring that up because it's kind of funny. As I'm hearing the shit talk, I also start to see, a close up of her face. I turn my head and I see like we're right in front of her, and she's moaning.
Yeah. So to carry on the tone that MJ had before, once Ellen falls to her back, like it almost looks like as if she's laying down in a grave.
Yeah.
And then the camera cuts to a close-up of Ellen's face and she's moaning in a very sexual manner. And it becomes faster and louder, very much like how whenever you're in bed with someone. But you don't see anything really happen. Like, not even her dress is pulled up. She's not really
like
moving
naked
either.
Yeah.
She's just making the noise. So you can get the implication based off of the way that Ellen is like portraying herself, but she's not expressive. During, I guess, for lack of better words, the peak of it all, we see Ellen jolt awake and we come to realize everything that was playing out was almost like a dream. But she ends up actually cuddling into her husband, Thomas. This is Thomas's turn to wake up and start because Ellen's crying. He takes the time to calm her down, and the two of them talk about the honeymoon that they just had not lasting long enough. Ellen playfully like pulls Thomas back and forth from the bed as he's like stepping out to get ready for work, but Thomas at the end of it all ends up getting ready, and when he finally leaves, he makes a run for the train. So we all know that he's running late. Once Thomas makes to his office, it seems to be almost like an established realtor business, or just like a business of trade
like
altogether.
Like a land clerk or something.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say realtor because I don't know if like the realtor position existed in that time, but it was some form of trading, and it had to do with like houses, lands, properties, castles, things like that.
The old Thomas is described as a land clerk based off the sign of his desk in the 1922 film.
Yeah.
But again, Marva's right. They don't really say anything, so we just have to assume it's people who sell land or sell houses. Yeah.
Very much like today's realtors. And that's why, for lack of better terms, I use that. But essentially, when he walks in, we see his boss, Enoch, has an assignment for him, essentially. And it's to bring back a very rich individual who lives in a castle in a far-off city in a little town, due to this very rich individual wanting to live in the town that Thomas and his boss is at as a form of retirement. Thomas essentially agrees due to his boss saying that once he closes this deal, Thomas will be hired permanently to the company as a full-time staff member, which I think is fucking jerky. But anyway.
Yeah, and this is also very important though too, because we kind of skipped over the conversation, but it's also because it comes up later whenever we meet Thomas's friends.
Yes.
And that's because Thomas needs money. Like, it's under the implication that even though they have a place to live, it's not exactly what he wants to give Ellen. And
not just that, I almost got the implication, I don't mean to interrupt,
you're
but
fine.
like they seem to be borrowing the house that they're in. It doesn't really seem to be theirs. And we don't know whose it is, but from what I picked up on, it's not Thomas's and it's not Ellen's.
I think we can take a guess as to whose it is later, but we would have got into that, once we get there. But like, that's why it's super important for him to get this job, and that's why he's willing to take it on. But if you remember, Thomas himself is almost kind of like thinking it's a little weird that this whole thing would happen, and it's almost like Knock has to give the reaffirmation that, like, hey, if you do this, you are going to get the job. Because it's almost like Thomas didn't want to do it before that. Yeah. So I think it's not common for that to, like, at least back then anyways, for someone to go all the way out to. We're assuming it's either Transylvania or like a knockoff Transylvania.
Essentially, because the way that Knock explains everything is that it's still within Germany, which, by the way, everybody's speaking English. It's all in Germany. And Thomas is just going to have to go, like, southeast-ish. I don't know which way the compass was really directed.
It's a multiple week trip or something.
Yeah, it's like a week's trip to get there. He needs to close the deal and then a week's trip back. So at the very least, a month. And Thomas is a newlywed. He has his wife. We come to later on find out another reason one of his, like, restraints for even saying yes immediately when it has to tie to Ellen. But he says yes because Knock heavily implies that there's going to be a lot of money behind this deal, one. And two, Thomas is going to get a very permanent position to where, like, they can't debate his legitimacy within the company.
So Thomas makes it back home to tell the news to his wife, but she isn't the most thrilled. She wants to keep Thomas nearby and not let him leave. At first, you think it's just because she will be missing him, like pretty much any, I guess, newlywed would miss their significant other. But Ellen takes the time to explain her dream and the dread she feels for their marriage. Ellen describes her dream to Thomas. And at this point, it's implied that it's not just this one dream. It happens fairly often, at least I'm assuming since they got married. And when she's describing the dream to Thomas, she says it's identical to their wedding. But instead of her marrying Thomas, she's marrying death, and she was happy about it. She's already crying, but she cries more into Thomas's arms and says that she does not want him to leave without her. Now, this is where it is an interesting scene because we kind of get into a flash forward or cut straight into a flash forward, but it's no more than just a little bit after that conversation.
Yeah, maybe at most an hour.
Yeah. And it's and we're not making a knock at the editing of this movie. I'm pretty sure that was intentional.
Yes.
Because this movie does have some comedic moments or like dark comedy, if
very
you will.
dark comedy.
Especially when we get to Willem Dafoe a little later on.
Yes.
But I'm assuming that's the intention of the scene where we cut to the newlywed sitting in a carriage on their way to a mutual's house, the Hardings.
Yeah. Mind you, I think it's around this time where the movie cuts to Knock. He's on the office floor. He seems to be like butt fucking naked, chanting some weird ass shit. Has like a pentacle looking thing drawn on the floor.
And I know this happens a little or not this scene that Marva's talking about, but when his office gets investigated later in the movie, we come to find out that pentagon is actually right in the middle of his office. So now looking back at that scene, he was butt-ass naked with candles in the middle of his office.
Yeah, carving this kind of intricate symbol onto the floor, almost like making it seem like it's a ritual or summon or things along those lines. So already, as an audience member, you know this trip is cursed. Throw in Ellen's superstition into the mix, the fact that Thomas didn't really want to go, and the fact that Thomas is like really pushing for this to happen in regards to the money. It's essentially a recipe for disaster.
Like, you know something is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Ellen is later depicted to be in the living room playing with the two young girls and Anna. Anna is Mrs. Harding, the wife to Thomas's best friend, Friedrich, Mr. Harding. And the two young girls I thought were really freaking funny. When they started talking...
Like, Papa!
Yeah, for some people in the audience were kind of laughing. I didn't want to laugh, but...
I was chuckling in my head. I didn't do it out loud. I was like, Marva, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it.
But while Ellen is with the two girls and their mother, we have Thomas talking to Friedrich, and it's about the potential promotion he'll be getting, how he can finally pay the other back. Now, it's never stated, but as Marva and I were saying just a little bit ago, we can make the assumption that Friedrich has been giving them money, and or that actually may be one of Friedrich's properties. Yeah.
And the reason behind this is because, like, the house that Friedrich is in is huge.
Like, it's really huge. And, like, for back then, too, like...
Yeah, like, estate style huge.
Yeah.
Not even that, but Ellen, I think, makes a comment in the carriage about how, like, he acts a lot like his father now. Thomas comes to Friedrich's defense and says, like, you know, like, he had to inherit his father's business, saying the keyword, like, had to, almost seems like as if Friedrich never wanted this to begin with. But during this whole, like, interchange, you do see Thomas depict his gratefulness to Friedrich, not just for the resources that he's let Thomas borrow, but also the fact that he's letting Ellen stay with them.
So Marva mentioned this in her notes, and it's the fact that it's almost implied that Friedrich is, like, in charge of the town's ports.
Yep.
So, and that comes into play a little bit later.
Closer towards, like, the third act.
Yeah, where it's almost like he has say over, like, what gets closed off and what doesn't. So it's like, I mean, if he's in charge of the importing and the exporting of that city, I mean, or whatever they are in Germany, that actually is...
He's like, fucking balling.
Yeah, that he's balling for back then. So it's like, and even now you would be balling.
He'd be balling now, yeah.
Yeah, so... But Friedrich tries to play it off. You know, it's no big deal that, you know, this is happening. Plus, whenever you do get this promotion, you're going to be well off. They throw some, like, little jokes and jabs about how Friedrich is going to have another kid soon, and when is Thomas and Ellen going to have a kid as well.
Yeah.
But nothing, like, too crazy. The children go up, and then Thomas and Ellen, you know, do their thing.
Before they go up, though, they do look at Friedrich and they say, will you come and make sure that the room is empty? The monster has been coming as of late.
That's right.
And I want to make sure that the closets are empty. The room is empty. And Thomas looks to the newly couple and Anna and says, I have to go check the room, it seems. I'm a slayer now.
And it was specifically how a monster was going to eat them, too.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just, like, you know, a ghost or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, don't let them eat me, papa, right?
Yeah, don't let them eat me, papa. The fucking papa.
So the way Marva and I wrote these notes is a little bit interesting just because this movie, once you get to the second act, there's a lot of cutting back and forth. It's very frequent. In fact, some of the cutting back and forth is very intentional because whatever is happening with Thomas is almost like it's being played out in Ellen's dream. It's never, like, I don't think it's actually really told to us that Ellen can see what is happening to Thomas because she doesn't know where he is when he goes missing, which we'll cover that in a second.
Yeah.
But also, by the way, I'm not worried about spoilers or anything because this is, like I said, a shot-for-shot remake of the 1922 film. So if you've seen that, you kind of know how the story goes. But when Thomas goes missing, she doesn't know where he's at.
No.
So the idea is that she can't really see him, but again, it's almost implied like when she starts to dream, that's when we kind of cut to Thomas and what's happening to him. So it is kind of interesting. So I thought a fun idea that we could do for at least for this podcast is maybe Marva breaks down what happens to Ellen on her side of this whole month journey, and then once she passes it back to me, I'll break down what happened with Thomas.
Yeah, to further expand on what MJ was saying, essentially, like, you are literally getting a play-by-play of seeing what happens to this couple who are hundreds of miles apart, And it's happening within the same time frame.
Yeah, and like from their POV too.
Exactly. So what's going on with Ellen on this day at this time versus what's going on to Thomas on that exact day on that exact time. So instead of me constantly cutting back and forth between the two, just like what MJ said, I will be talking about what happened with Ellen throughout this month process, while MJ later on takes the time to explain what happens to Thomas during this month process.
Go ahead, my dear.
So once Thomas leaves, this is when Ellen starts to quote unquote act up. She seems to almost get possessed late at night and have these fits that seem a lot like seizures, but she can actually speak through them and can speak out certain words. Most of the time, for those of you who don't know, when you have a seizure, you can't speak. And one of the biggest fears is that the individual who is seizing may bite off their own tongue because your jaw locks in place.
Right.
So with having seizure-like symptoms and Ellen still being able to speak, cross that off the list for me. I was like, okay, well, seizures, fuck no. What the hell's going on then? There's no actual medical explanation. And I don't know if that was intentional or not. If it was, kudos to Eggers. And if it wasn't, still kudos to Eggers. He did a great job.
No one Eggers probably was intentional.
Probably. But these fits, if you will, get so bad that Friedrich gets the family doctor to come and visit Ellen and see what could be really wrong with her. The doctor goes through a few different treatments, if you will, and reaches a point to where he doesn't know what else to do other than tie her up to the bed that Ellen has been using and drug her up with a fuck ton of morphine, or at least opioids, to say the very least. The doctor realizes that, this is more of like a quick fix, not a long-term treatment, and suggests to Friedrich that they need to go and visit his mentor, a doctor who has taken a liking to more non-scientific methods of treatments, almost like alchemy, Dr. Eberhardt. So Friedrich's doctor takes the time to really build up this character as like somebody who's very forward, was thrown out from like the society that doctors are known to be in. And when Friedrich makes it to Dr. Eberhardt's place, he seems almost like a loon. And you see the doubt on Friedrich's face. The doctor just keeps consoling Friedrich, saying like, hey, don't worry, we're going to go, you're going to see. Like, he genuinely is really bright. He just seems to fit outside of the mold that society wants to make for him.
Eggers did a good job of like almost bringing to life a character with Willem Dafoe's great acting of like somebody you could see being like in a 1920s film.
Yes.
Like I can see the way he maneuvered and moved from place to place, the way he talked to Friedrich and Dr. Sievers. It was like I can envision him like being silent and the music behind him as if this was a silent film. Like they did a phenomenal job with this character.
Yeah, and Willem Dafoe himself is a phenomenal actor, so I can definitely see why they gave him that role to begin with. But once, we get the introductions done and we really figure out Dr. Eberhardt for how he is, who, by the way, he loves cats. We love people who love cats. Dr. Eberhardt makes his way over to Friedrich's place, and he takes a look at Ellen. So Dr. Eberhardt reacts in a very volatile way whenever he sees Ellen strung up and doped up. And after some evaluation and cleansing her body of those opioids and then watching her, I guess, quote unquote, react and have the fit throughout the night, he concludes that Ellen is not mentally or physically ill, but that she is spiritually ill. He suggests that something may be possessing her and that she can't be tied up or drugged. She needs to be able to express herself fully to determine what is really wrong with her. So essentially, Eberhardt needs to sit there, watch Ellen as she's having her fits, interact with her, and then that'll allow for him to know where to start from there.
Is the implication with Dr. Sievers constantly doping her up that he was making her vulnerable to...
He was dulling it out.
Okay.
He was dulling it out severely. That this is more of like a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It's only helping for the time being. Ellen may become numb to the morphine, and when they have a fit, that nothing can control it.
Gotcha.
Right? So once like I mentioned, Eberhard is able to get all the drugs out of her system. He stays the night, watches over her, and she has her full episodes. Around the very end of this episode, Ellen keeps saying he's coming and then finally seizes, but right before she seizes, it again, the way that she's like carrying herself and the way that she's speaking makes it seem like as if she is like having sex or at the very least like enjoying herself in her sleep. So I don't know. The doctor just breaks the news that Ellen, once she breaks the news over to Ellen once she comes to, and Ellen, I guess, finally has that switch flipped to where she realizes who's possessing her. Everybody else leaves the room, I think, around this time, and she confides to Dr. Eberhardt about her dreams and her past with the dark figure. And the doctor does his searching to find out what the entity is that's possessing her. And this is where Eberhard kind of does his own research, but I'm going to toss it back over to MJ so this way he covers what was going on with Thomas during this whole fiasco.
Yeah, so as Marvin and I pointed out earlier, since a lot of these dreams were also very much connecting to what was happening with Thomas, we'll go over what happened on his journey.
Yeah.
Poor fucking dude, bro. I mean, he was warned, though.
He was.
I will have to say that, though.
To an extent.
To an extent. So during all this, the movie's cutting back to Thomas and his venture to meet the Lord. He rides out on a horse, and he rides for a while before coming across the village of the Lord. And again, we're under the assumption, I don't remember if they say Transylvania or not.
They don't say any fucking city name. Not the city that Ellen and Thomas are in, and not the city that fucking Nosferatu
It's just that he's far away from wherever Ellen and the city is.
Yeah.
But the logic, and by boat too, actually, we'll have to get into that actually later in a second. But yeah, so this dude is somewhere, and I'm just gonna say Transylvania for the sake of this podcast, because this is, I guess, an illegal adaptation of Dracula, and that's where Dracula's from. So
yeah,
so he goes out to meet him in Transylvania, and he comes across a small village outside of Transylvania, and they're all dancing and celebrating, being as hospitable as I guess anybody can be. Now, I will say this part. Please forgive me for what I'm about to say, because I don't know what else to refer to this type of village and or group, but and it is kind of racist. But in fact, I'm not even gonna say the word. But once you hear me say it, you're gonna know what I'm talking about. It's almost implied that they're like gypsies.
I mean, even the hostel headmaster yells out the word that you just did and just calls them like everything under the sun under that word.
Yeah, and the reason why I point that out is because once I get into it, they do straight up just like get up and leave. Like they take everything with them.
Yeah.
And that is very much what people from the older generation would refer to as like the nomads, or just people who went from place to place.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the people, like the gypsies, were also very much into the supernatural, into the occult. But so Thomas ends up being greeted by the hostel manager, who is turning him away. The people in this small village are speaking a completely different language, and Thomas cannot communicate with them at all. The manager is the one who is the most concerned, but Thomas pleads with him, saying he'll pay double the price of an average stay. And before we get to the part where Thomas falls asleep, I believe there's actually an older woman who comes up to him, right, and tells him like something is like, do not meet this person, do not... Or like
like your trip is cursed. Before the hostel manager even comes out to talk to Thomas, you see the entire crowd point at him and laugh.
Yeah.
So again, you feel the sense of like feeling very uncomfortable.
Right. And I mean, shit, if Thomas had known what that old woman was saying, he might have listened.
Yeah.
But couldn't really understand them. So we see then Thomas is in the hostel and sleeps. He just doesn't sleep through the night. When Thomas wakes up, he sees the villagers walking around with torches in a group and decides to follow them. He keeps following them until they reach a graveyard, and he tucks away behind a bush. The villagers then dig up a grave. And by the way, they also have what they're referring to, what we would refer to as like a sacrifice. That they're literally carrying a young woman who's like butt naked too.
On a horse.
On a horse. And they chant some prayers to the corpse, or so we think it's a corpse. They grab an iron stake to stab it. And what we can assume is like in the chest or in the heart. When the villagers are about to stab the corpse The corpse comes back to life, grasping for air, and it even bleeds darker than normal blood. Thomas yells out, and the villagers see him in the bush, but when Thomas comes to, it's like as if he never left his bed. However, the camera pans to his feet, and his feet are very much muddy and dirty, as if he had been out walking around during night.
With no shoes on.
With no shoes on. Gross. I'm just kidding. Not for back then. So,
No, I mean...
When he gets ready for the day, Thomas leaves the hostel but cannot find anyone in the town. He can't even find his horse. That's why I referred to them as like gypsies. That's probably what the intention is. He makes his way to the Lord's castle. However, as he's walking there, he gets picked up by like an carriage that's not even being pulled by anybody, right?
No, the carriage very much gives off Beauty and the Beast vibes.
Yeah.
The carriage that has no horse to really pull it, or ghost horses, I guess. A cross between Beauty and the Beast and Harry Potter. Just creepy.
When he enters the carriage carries him back to the castle, and he's finally at the castle of Transylvania, and you can feel this ominous energy that the castle has itself, and Robert Eggers does a good job of just showing you that the atmosphere has completely changed. Like, you're in for something completely different. You're not gonna know what this is, and it's, yeah. Thomas is calling out to see who will be with him, and the Lord finally makes his way down himself. When he breathes, it's an interesting experience. I'm actually glad you put this in the notes, because it's like on some Darth Vader shit, man. Like,
except worse.
Yeah.
Much, much worse. It's very labored. Almost like as if he's on his last dying breath.
Yeah.
But not really.
And you hear it each time he takes a breath too. Like, no breath is wasted. No need for jokes. I'm just
It's very scratchy, like it's very raw. Like as if somebody, like I said, is taking their last breath, but he never takes his last breath.
As the two make their way through the castle, the Lord tells Thomas of his intentions of moving to this town himself. The two are having conversations about business and the fact that Thomas is a newlywed. The Lord seems to take an interest in Thomas's wife and even the timeline of which the duo got together. Thomas spends the night at the castle but continues to have his wild dreams. When he wakes up, he finds holes on his chest and he's rather dizzy. And he searches out for the Lord and does not come across him until much later. The two then strike up a deal about the property the Lord will be buying. Thomas agrees to be the rep that the Lord needs, and they settle on the amount, with the Lord giving Thomas an advance bonus of sorts. Thomas asks the Lord if he can leave the castle to head back to his wife, but the Lord declines, saying that it is too dangerous to travel alone during the night and that he will wait until the next morning. I mean, bruh. I would just get the fuck out of there, but it is what it is. The Lord at some point during this exchange ended up taking a locket filled with Ellen's hair from Thomas, but does not return it to him. There's even a funny scene where I think he's yelling out to him, "But you have my locket!"
Yeah.
But again, this movie, I don't know if it's supposed to be funny, but it's there. Little comedic moments. Thomas continues to protest, but the Lord doesn't hear it, and the movie cuts to the next day. Thomas once again wakes up with holes on his chest, and he is now determined to find a way out. Some time passes, but we eventually see the Lord sleeping in a coffin. Thomas, who is doing his best eavesdropping like he did the night at the village, he ends up seeing that Orlok is essentially something inhuman, because up until this point, the way Eggers has shot this was that it was very much like just shadowy. All you could really see was like the mustache that Orlok had, the black coat. Like, you really couldn't see much.
The bald head.
It all just took place in a very dark area where like the fire was like lit in one area, but Orlok was never next to the fire.
So it was very interesting. The movie takes on a very like black and white tone anytime Orlok is around. Anytime the Lord or Nosferatu, however you want to call him. It takes a very like grayscale tone, which I like.
Yeah. Or if you do see a little bit of highlight from like the fire or something, it's very much like on the edge.
It's very muted.
Very on the edge of his coat. Like, it's nothing more than that. So very cool lighting effects when it comes to that. So at this point, it's a big deal because what he sees in that coffin is not human. It is, And he grabs a steel pole and is getting ready to stab the Lord when he suddenly wakes up. Now, as an audience member, you can tell that the Lord wakes up due to the fact that the sun went down. When the Lord is fully awake, he sets his wolves on Thomas. Thomas jumps off the ledge of the castle and into the river below. He washes up to the nearby town's riverbed, and the townspeople take care of him. It is at this point that Thomas has gone missing. He has not made it back from his trip. There's even a scene where I believe Ellen is with the Friedrich and Anna, and they're very much at like the coastline or something, as if like they're waiting for Thomas, or they're just
to come in by boat,
or they're just like talking there or something like that, and they are very much just don't know what happened, but Anna and them make it very much apparent to Ellen that she can stay with them until he comes by, and that Friedrich is using all of his power to find Thomas and to bring him back.
Yeah.
But I'll let it go back to Marva because I've been talking way too much.
So just like what MJ said, around this time, like Thomas has been proclaimed as lost. Friedrich has been dumping all his resources into finding him. No one can really seem to find Thomas. So we get a little sneak back onto Ellen where she still is very vividly having these episodes. But they seem to almost be very extreme now. Dr. Everhart concludes that Ellen is essentially possessed, and it's by a demon who goes by the name of Nosferatu, a demon who preys on lonely women and takes claim of their flesh. The Doctor and Ellen have a heart-to-heart about what she did as a child, which we as audience members find out that, hey, that dream that Ellen had in the very beginning of the movie is not a dream, it's a flashback. And like she literally says, I was like lonely, young. It was late at night. I was calling out for somebody to like help me feel like I belonged, that I was wanted. And unknowingly, she called out to Nosferatu. Dr. Everhart essentially breaks away, and he does his own research furthermore, learning that Ellen is the only one who can break the curse, and that all this has to be done by her willingly renouncing her current vows and agreeing to make new ones with Nosferatu. Before the Doctor can come across Ellen to tell her himself, Thomas comes back to his hometown. So,
also, real quick, by the way, sorry to cut you off, but there was something that we did kind of glide over, and that was during the back and forth with Ellen and Thomas and their POVs. There's a moment where Dr. Sievers has an assistant or someone come up to him and let them know that there's been a man who was eating raw sheep.
Yeah.
And that person was Ernok, who is the boss of Thomas, the realtor. And
he seems to be going mad.
Yeah, and they institutionalize him where he literally eats a bird right in front of them. Like
he chops off a pigeon's head.
So
which props to the actor.
Yeah. So all that kind of happened too. And that's also very much, I guess, the build up to Orlok, who really does want Ellen.
Yeah, to say the very least.
And it was all a huge play, right? It was like the obviously Ernok was working with Orlok, and it was just a huge coup. So.
Everything essentially was building up to a certain point, and we're about to get to it right now. Before Thomas makes it to Ellen and makes it back to his hometown, we see bits and pieces of him being actually tended to by the village people and undergoing like ritualistic cleanses that they believed in. This is where that spirituality or like understanding of the supernatural comes into play that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
When Thomas is like well enough, he tells the townspeople how he wants to go back, but the leader of the group essentially looks straight to Thomas and has an interpreter next to her who's telling him that you can't leave, you're not fully healed. And we see Nosferatu also make his way towards Thomas's hometown. So while Thomas made it back, Nosferatu is still on a ship. However, he's in a crate, just like a shipping crate. And everybody on the boat starts to get sick, and rats start infesting the ship. The plague seems to be a major concern for all the members. But at the very end, everybody who's aboard the ship becomes very sick. So now we know historically when this is all taking place, especially with the plague being like a big concern.
Yeah, it's like the early 1800s. It was like the mid 1800s or something like that.
16, 17.
No, it's they say early 1800s Germany.
Oh, never mind. Well, plague started early, I guess. in my head.
I'm sure the 1600s had their own something, but we always got something.
Yeah,
heavy.
we always have some sort of pandemic, if you will. Sorry, guys, triggering. Thomas essentially meets with Ellen at Friedrich's place. So this is where the two of them finally meet after a month or little after a month goes by. But he's not able to get himself and his wife back to their own place. He's so ill that Ellen and Thomas are forced to stay at Friedrich's house for longer. However, in consequence of Thomas coming back, Ellen miraculously is better compared to just the night before.
Yeah.
She can sleep through the night. She's not having these fits. She is more sound of mind, not as dreamy. And she explains to Anna and Friedrich that Thomas essentially helps her stay sane and that he's the reason why she can stay so attached to the physical world. Ellen always takes a moment to talk to Anna or to anybody who's willing to lend an ear and listen that she has always been a very dreamy child. And dreamy in the sense of like she lives in her own head. So Thomas allows for her to be more attuned to what's going on around her versus what's in her head. Speaking of Thomas, actually, he's ill. He seems to be battling a fever of some sorts. And around this time, we see Nosferatu and Ellen interact for the first time in years. So
keep in mind, this also happens around the time when she's sharing the bed with Anna, because Friedrich is somewhere off with Dr. Sievers and I believe Eberhard as well. And then Thomas is also in bed sick. And I'm assuming that's why Ellen's not sleeping with him. So
well, Ellen is in bed with him at first. And the two doctors and Friedrich are actually visiting the mental facility because Knox's case is getting worse and worse and worse. Ellen is in the bed with Friedrich at first. However, because Friedrich is so
Thomas is so sick.
Sorry.
You're fine.
Thomas is so sick that when Ellen is trying to cuddle up with him, he actually yells out saying that he can't breathe and pushes her off of him.
That's why she leaves.
So she ends up leaving, going and goes to Anna's room and ends up sleeping with her, like in her bed.
That's something else that I forgot to bring up earlier when we talked about the introduction to the Hardings, is that it seems like Anna and Ellen are actually really good friends. It's not just a Thomas and Friedrich and they're cool by association. They're actually like supposedly really cool friends.
Everybody, like, Anna seems very attuned with Ellen. Friedrich is very attuned with Thomas.
Yeah.
Friedrich doesn't necessarily understand Ellen, but Anna always comes to Ellen's defense.
Yeah.
However, like I mentioned, though, Ellen and Nosferatu or Orlok end up interacting for the first time in years, and this is when the demon reaches out to her without her being asleep.
Right.
Nosferatu lets Ellen know that everything that she loves will vanish and perish from this earth unless she renounces her vows from Thomas and marries Nosferatu like she has promised all those years ago. Naturally, Ellen declines, and Nosferatu demonstrates the ferocity of his power. So he says, within 3 nights, I will take everything that you love and hold dear. So this is night 1. And he essentially demonstrates with Anna, Friedrich's wife, and she gets bitten by a bunch of sickly rats in her sleep while Ellen is in bed with her.
That's a gnarly scene. Dude.
Yeah, so essentially Anna is on the floor and Ellen wakes up to the sound of like moaning, but it's not like sensual moaning. She looks over she reaches out into the bed, doesn't feel Anna, looks over the bed onto the floor, and you see Anna is laying completely still with rats gnawing at her body, and Ellen screams out. The next scene is, I feel like, a rational reaction of anybody who sees their partner laying on the floor being gnawed by rats. Friedrich is yelling at Ellen, letting her know that he's not comfortable with the way that Thomas and Ellen are acting under his roof, and that the haunting that they're experiencing, it did not start until Ellen actually came into the picture. That Ellen is the reason why a lot of these bad things are happening to him and his family.
Which he's not like entirely wrong about. That. It's not the way to handle it, obviously, but you can't blame him for like rashing out. But
yeah.
But Thomas going on that trip and Ellen having this history with Orlok, I mean, obviously is the reason why all this is happening.
Yep.
So it's, I mean...
Friedrich was in the right to an extent. Not fully, but to an extent.
And also to keep in mind, too, there's something else that we didn't probably think about. And I'm not saying Friedrich himself was thinking of this when his wife was fucking dying from the plague.
Yeah.
But the boat that Nosferatu was in crashed into the port, and all the rats came out, and people are getting sick. Like,
left and right.
And people are dying. So I would imagine also, before obviously Anna got bit, Friedrich was also dealing with the fact that he's probably losing out on money. The ports were fucking demolished with that crash, and now there's a plague.
No one's gonna want to trade.
The plague is killing that whole city. So, like, Friedrich probably had a lot of stress on himself, and then now add in his wife being part of the plague now. So it's like, yeah, I can see why he was probably so, wired up and ready to just blow up on everyone. And
he also, like, didn't really seem to be handling Ellen's situation all too well.
Even beforehand.
So this, I feel like, was the tipping point because the voice of reason, being Anna, was not in play anymore.
And going back to what you made mention of that, I completely forgot, was how she had mentioned that he's a lot more like his father now.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, like, a man from... an older man, even during that time period in the 1800s, would be very,
black and white.
Yeah. So.
Very black and white. So, because of this and the reaction that Friedrich gives Ellen, she decides to collect all of her things and Thomas's things, and the two of them literally limp back over to their place. That very evening, we get yet another demonstration of what Nosferatu can do. He swoops into the Hardings' children's room and kills the two daughters of Friedrich and Anna.
I did not think we were going to see that scene that way.
I didn't think so either. So the scene opens up with Friedrich and Anna in the same bed. Nosferatu's iconic, like, shadow hand comes into play, and you hear him speak, I think in his native tongue, saying that Friedrich won't wake up. Not even a second later, I guess half a second, Friedrich and Anna's daughters scream out bloody murder and for help, saying how that they're about to die, they're about to get eaten, they want their dad to come and help them, but he's not waking up. Anna wakes up from all the screams. She's trying to wake up Friedrich. Friedrich is not fucking waking up. So Anna goes to figure out what's wrong. Mind you can tell that she's very hesitant because she still has those gashes all over her body. But then she also screams out. When Anna opens the door before she's killed, you see Nosferatu's silhouette in the window while he's holding on to the two girls' necks, either getting ready to snap their necks or just getting ready to bite into them. I think both.
One was already dead when she opens the door, but then you see him actually take a bite out of the other one. Yeah.
So it's like a very...
You hear that crunch too, bro. Like,
yeah.
It's very loud. It's very graphic, and...
It's very petrifying.
And we haven't talked enough yet about Orlok. Bill Skarsgård's performance. I mean, first Pennywise, now this dude. I'm not going to say his other movies aren't good, because he's a good actor, but it's like, I think he has a knack for these monster movies, bro. Like, I think he's just cast him make him Frankenstein, bro. Make him, because he's a tall dude. So seeing him hold those two little girls like that was just a very underappreciated scene of just practically how much of a monster Orlok is, like just how freakishly tall he is compared to, because when you're like a little person, you're fucking 3 foot looking up at someone who's like 6'5", you're like,
you're gonna be petrified.
Yeah, that's a monster to you, you know. So, but by the way, I didn't actually realize this, but I saw this on Twitter. Still not calling it X. Fuck you. On Twitter, the implication is that the reason why he went so graphic with that, why it was such a I'm gonna kill the daughters and Anna, was because he was retaliating to him visually seeing the sex scene with Thomas and Ellen, because he can see it through her eyes. So he almost, like, was it a jealous bit of rage that he did that? That was
Thomas and Ellen have their moment of like
that was
fucking out of spite.
So I guess the idea is that maybe he would have killed Anna only, Like, he would have came back and finished the job, and that would have been the second night. But I think because he was so pissed off because of what... I guess he sees it as cheating. He was so pissed off, he actually went and not just killed Anna, but he also killed the two daughters as well. So,
yeah.
But I didn't realize that, but that actually makes sense as to why that scene is so violent and why it's like right after that moment. It's like, oh, he's retaliating. That's his way of getting back at her. So that makes sense. But... So when Friedrich comes to, he is devastated to find out that his entire family has been murdered. They hold a funeral, and you get this very cool scene. You see it like in a lot of other movies as well, where in the background you see Ellen, you see Dr. Sievers, you see Dr. Ebenhart or Von Franz, whatever you want to call him, and then you see Thomas, and it's almost like a little mini rebellion group or like little mini Avengers, you know what I mean? Like they're getting ready to do something, something's gonna pop off, and Friedrich ends up joining them, but they still give him a minute because I think someone dropped the line. I think it might have been Thomas, but he's like, for good sakes, like his whole family has just been murdered.
Just died, yeah.
Like,
give him a moment.
Second. Yeah, because they're almost like, you need to hurry up and get over here so we can plan. But it's like, give them a second.
They decide to take matters into their own hands almost.
Yeah, they decide to take matters into their own hands. And Friedrich finally joins them, and then they're in the carriage, pretty much contemplating on how to handle all of this. The entire town has been infested with the plague. Everyone has either died or they've gone mad or they're ill. Thomas is still sickly while Ellen's dreams become more and more realistic. And in the carriage ride, whenever they drop off Dr. Ebenhart, that's when she's able to talk to him about the plan. And they pretty much come to it on their own that it has to be her. And they're going to just let Thomas kind of plan this crusade on his own, but the reality of the situation is going to come down to Nosferatu or Orlok versus Ellen. Like, it just has to be them. Like, there's no one else that can get involved because of the research that he's done, and it just makes sense. They talk about how Ellen would be viewed as a priestess in earlier times, but now she's regarded as a loon or mental patient. Ellen finds solace in this and thanks the doctor for all of his help throughout this entire ordeal. So that very evening, all the men go to the Friedrich's family's crypt, and they find Friedrich also ill with the illness that is spreading. And I will say, that was interesting that he decided to sleep in the same bed with his wife, knowing that she possibly could have had the plague. I think they were even aware that she might have it too, because she was afraid to go check on the kids. Like she probably didn't want to pass whatever sickness she got from the rats to the kids. So I don't know if him sleeping with her was the best choice, but... I mean,
they didn't think that direct contact would be okay. You could tell that Friedrich was kind of sleeping in his own little corner while Anna was sprayed out in hers, so...
And it's also older times, too, so that maybe they didn't, know how much something like that could spread. But, anyways, since Friedrich is pretty much dead at this point, just dying of the illness, and he's just spread out on the coffin or Anna's coffin, they decide to burn the corpses. And at this point, Thomas declares that this ends tonight. They cannot wait any longer. Plus, I think that would make sense anyways, because wouldn't this technically be the third night?
Yeah.
So, I mean, they would have to do that regardless. Because I think Dr. Sievers is the one who mentions they should wait until the morning time because the sun's about to set, but it makes no sense. I mean, yeah. So Thomas and them then go to the Grunwald Manor, which is where that's the location that I believe Ernok had told Thomas about in the past, that's where he would stay at. They get there, they find a coffin, they think they're about to kill Orlok, they open it up, grab a stake in, but instead it ends up being Nock. Well, at least they killed one guy who's biting things. Yeah. So they kill Nock. That's when Thomas makes a remark about how he wants to go check on Ellen because it makes sense. If Orlok is not here, he has to be with Ellen. Dr. Ebenhart protests. This is when Thomas puts two and two together. He realizes that Dr. Ebenhart and Ellen cracked up a plan to which Ellen would give herself up as a willing sacrifice, and it would be her who confronts Nosferatu on her own. The men make their way to Thomas's home while the audience gets to watch Ellen and Nosferatu interact in person. I looked over to you. I'm going to let you talk about this part, but I looked over
Oh, dear.
I looked over to you and I said, babe, if they're about to fuck, I'm going to lose it. And then I look at the screen. She get naked. So I'm going to let you talk about this.
Of course you talked it to me around this part. So yeah, we get to see Ellen and Nosferatu interact in person for the first time in years. Personally, for me, I don't know if you got this vibe. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't get this vibe. You can tell that Ellen almost has this like despise towards Nosferatu.
Yeah.
She's not fully comfortable with it, but she understands her role. However, she also knows she needs to be willing to renounce her vows from Thomas and willingly give herself up to Nosferatu in order for things to play out in the humans' favor.
Yeah.
So I think she kind of lets her own personal emotions get pushed off. She feels them, but then she pushes them off to the side. Ellen renounces her vows and renews them in Nosferatu. And it allows for the two of them to move on to the next step, which is solidifying the bond that they now share. Which, like how you mentioned, the two of them end up fucking. And that's probably one of the more uncomfortable scenes. I think I hadn't felt this uncomfortable in a movie theater since X. But I think X also took the show because it was happening more frequently. This was like one.
And it's only implied to...
No, Nosferatu's laying on top with no clothes on.
What I get by implied is that when we see that, you can almost tell that Nosferatu had just stopped at what they're doing. And then that's when he reaches, and you guys can't see, but like he puts his hands between her breasts and that's when he bites.
Yeah.
So it's like they had just done the act, whereas with X, you see it happening. Like pretty, you see everything, dick, balls, everything.
Yeah.
That movie is very graphic.
Yeah, this one's not as graphic. You still feel uncomfortable, but it's not as graphic, I guess is the best way of saying. So the two of them lay in bed while Nosferatu is literally consuming Ellen. And the new couple, I guess, are sharing an intimate moment when the sun starts to rise. Nosferatu breaks away, looking over into the window, but Ellen holds on to him, pulling him back onto her. And I guess like a few more minutes tick by, and it's just enough time for the sun to burn Nosferatu, making him weak. And this is when the men, both doctors and Thomas, burst through the door. And I forget who, but one of them makes the final blow to Nosferatu. I think it's Thomas, killing Ellen in the process.
I think so. Yeah.
And when the camera pans out, you see the top portion of Nosferatu is still very much the same, but like waist down, he's literally skin and bones.
Yeah.
He looks like somebody who almost like starved to death.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because he was just feeding. So
Right.
I guess the sun completely drained his life force, if you will.
Even after him just consuming basically Ellen entirely, because
Yeah.
I feel like she was gonna die regardless if she got impaled with Nosferatu or not. Yeah, he had been draining her for a while.
For a long time. And she was already pale, but she looked even more pale. The camera kind of pans out, and it's almost like a very beautiful but very tragic scene where Nosferatu is almost like curled up on Ellen while Ellen is laying in bed and like blood sprayed around everywhere with like gray and like dark red flowers also like placed all around her. And then it just kind of like cuts back. The movie essentially concludes with Dr. Eberhardt making his final remarks and Thomas finding a way to carry on with the loss that he has now to bear. So he finally fully understands the loss that Friedrich felt whenever his wife passed. And I won't say the movie ends on a high note, but it provides enough comfort for the viewers to know that, at least for the time being, all that happened is like done. Nothing else is going to happen, at least for a while.
Yeah, that they pretty much saved the town. The plague is gone.
Yeah, we don't see the recovery process of it all.
But we can assume that it's gone because that's the whole point of getting rid of Nosferatu, because it was like a curse on the town. So
yeah.
It was his shit that started all that.
Yeah.
So. But I think the ending scene is almost very much just like a visual of the entire movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have Ellen there with Nosferatu literally clinging onto her, but then you have Thomas there holding her hand through everything.
Yeah.
So it's very much like a visual representation of like this is what her life has been like. Like Thomas has always been holding her hand and there for her, but she always had something like holding her back, you know, and
Yeah.
you very, very much see the representation of that in that last scene. It's a very beautiful scene, and Eggers is just phenomenal when it comes to direction and cinematography, so it makes sense. But that was Nosferatu, man. I don't know if I would call it my favorite horror movie of the year, but I think it was definitely like a good 8 out of 10 for me, and it might change when we rewatch it in the future. But
I never watched the original film, so I don't know. I don't have something to compare it to. I liked it. Very similar to what I told you whenever we first walked out of the film, out of the theaters, I should say. I think I enjoyed it more than you did. Mind you, I felt severely uncomfortable throughout the entire movie, but I still would like to strongly believe that I did like the movie more than you. So I would probably give it like an 8.5, 9. I would rank it as one of the better 2024 horror films that we watched.
yeah,
However, we still have yet to see Smile 2. And that was one of the major movies that hit like blockbuster numbers during 2024.
exactly. Yeah,
And I know you and I are fans of Smile, so I'm hoping that Smile 2 carries on that same wave of energy, if you will. But from what we have watched, I would for sure rank Nosferatu as one of the top 2024 horror films.
yeah. We'll
If
definitely
not
watch.
number one.
We'll definitely watch Smile 2 pretty soon. Probably once we get back from our trip. We're going to be going out of town soon. So we're going to have some fun stuff lined up for y'all, especially with Valentine's coming up as well.
Yes. It is the month of love, and it is also Black History Month. So MJ and I will be doing like Valentine-esque episodes. And then probably the last episode for this month will be very focused on like Black history. So more likely not Candyman. I haven't seen the original Candyman.
Yeah,
I did see the remake,
probably.
but I wouldn't mind watching Candyman.
I actually don't like the first Candyman movie, so that'll be interesting for me to rewatch it.
That's okay. I'll watch it for the first time. It's one of the reasons why I haven't watched the first film, by the way, is because MJ doesn't like it. I did watch the remake.
Yeah, that was also pretty gnarly too.
Yeah, but I haven't seen the original one. I do want to see the original one.
Yeah, so we'll probably rewatch it pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
But without further ado, man, this has been Nosferatu, and thank you guys for tuning in as always. And we'll catch you guys next week with another episode. Make sure to go follow us on everything. Like I said earlier, Slashers in Sync or Slash in Sync. Links will be in the bio. You can find us everywhere, man. We appreciate all the love and support. Shout out to Creepy Sweets too, man, for that recent interview. We're going to be trying to have more guests on in the future as well, because that was a pretty fun episode. And man, yeah, thank you guys for everything, and we'll talk to y'all later.
Bye.